everyone. Yes, I'm a Trekkie, and this is my handshake for the COVID-19 timeframe. Okay, my name is Matthew Crane. Some people ask me, do you prefer Matt or Matthew? And as I tell everyone else, I spent almost 25 years in the military, went by all kinds of titles, got called all kinds of stuff, both good and bad. So whatever you want to call me, I'm good with. So I grew up here in the Midwest, down in a town south of here called Rich Hill, even lived in Wablo, Lee Summit, Grandview, Kansas City, Independence, and I'm now here in Blue Springs. All right. And as I said, I was in the military. I was in the U.S. Coast Guard for almost 25 years. So that means that I'm a sailor. And yes, I know all the colorful words. So I'll make a point of striving not to say them. But however, I'll go ahead and apologize now, just in case I really get into what I'm talking about and I slip up a little bit. So you've been warned. All right. And I'll also let you know right off the bat that I'm really not a fan of religion. Because I don't like what humanity has done with it. And that's a conversation for another day, because I can go in depth on that one too. All right. So if you see me occasionally looking away, I made some notes. So, all right. So let's get going. Today's talk I call the God complex. Okay, to start out with, I want to ask everybody a question. And before you answer the question, I want you to actually give it some serious thought as to what I'm asking you and why I'm asking it. Because in reality, I'm not just asking you one question. I'm actually asking you a multitude of questions. And the question is, do you believe in God? Not only that, but what exactly do you believe in? Any question that we ask anybody is a loaded question to some degree or another. And certain assumptions are made. For an example, if you ask me directions to Tom's house, and I tell you to go down 3 miles, turn left at the old oak tree with the yellow ribbon tied around it, and then go down 10 blocks and turn right and look for the big red dog, whose name is Clifford, by the way. That's Tom's place. I don't have to explain to you what a mile is or a block or what left to right is. Again, certain assumptions are made, and that's common sense. All right. Another example is, take Reverend Erin, for instance. She's a fan of science fiction, so am I. So if I see a movie that I think she'll like, I will tell her about it. And then the next time I see her, I'll ask her if she's seen the movie. And she may say, yes, the movie sucked. Main character was horrible. Well, the main character may have been the one that I identified with the most. So there's a momentary letdown, momentary disappointment, because I was sure she would like it. Well, this also applies to the question of, do you believe in God? Because what I'm truly asking you is, are your values, your beliefs, your ideals similar to mine? And as Mr. Spock would say, logically speaking, no. And the reason for this is, I'm not you, and you're not me. We don't see things the same way. Doesn't mean that either one of us is wrong. Just means that we see things differently. Because everything that we have done in life, our experience and stuff, all come into play on how we see things, particularly God. And it can be things that range from the fact that Reverend Erin's a woman, I'm a man, we're going to see things different. Because I can pretty much guarantee you that Reverend Erin does not see things the same way now as she did when she first came to Unity. All right. Even the fact that Reverend Brandon is male, and so am I, we see things different because he's married and he has children. All right. Me, never married. I don't have any children. I just have 3 cats. Other things can come into play. For an example, as I've said earlier, I spent almost 25 years in the military. So that is going to have an influence on how I see things. Somebody who's a policeman or a fireman or a EMT will see things differently, as opposed to someone who hasn't. The way, all right, and even how you see God varies from person to person. The values, ideals, and beliefs, as I mentioned earlier, that was instilled in you are different than what was instilled in I. For an example, my sister and I were raised by our grandmother on my father's side, and what she instilled in us is different than what our biological mother or father would have instilled in us. So yes, we see things differently. All right. Now, I also don't want you to think that God and religion are the same, because they are not. I have sometimes heard the term used interchangeably. As I said earlier, they're not one and the same. They're, in my opinion, much like oil and water. They just really, truly don't mix. That would be like saying the fruit that the tree bears, they are one and the same. While one stems from the other, they're not identical. All right. Again, no two people look at the same thing in the same way. All we have to do is just look at the current events for a prime example of this. And so I've often thought that there is another way to ask the question, do you believe in God? So I'll come back to that at the end of this talk. Because if I'm going to ask you if you believe in God, we also have to take a moment and look at what is God. Some people say that God cannot be explained. And if God cannot be explained, then the question I have to ask is, what exactly are you asking me to believe in it at that point? Yes, I do believe in something greater than myself. I still don't know what to call it, actually. Personally, I have never cared for the term God. At least to me, it never seems to encompass whatever it is. However, for lack of a better term, I tend to use God as the default. One of the things that I have learned in all of my years that I've been walking this planet is that whatever it is, God, Allah, Vishnu, Shiva, the One, the All, Universe. I know somebody who even uses the term grandfather. I also like how Reverend Erin describes it as the God of your understanding. Is that whatever it is that it manifests itself to the individual, not the group, in a way that the person can best understand it. Which means that for one person, it may be Catholicism or Judaism or Islam or any of the other myriad of religions that are practiced across this planet today. Does it mean that any of us are wrong or right? It just means that's how we understand it. All right. So let's go ahead and look a little bit at some of what God is, perhaps. Some say that God is love. And correct me if I'm wrong, and I believe that the Beatles sang something along the lines of love is all there is. On Sundays, when we used to do this in person, and we all would get to see Reverend Erin walk on stage, and she would have her daughter G with her. What we are seeing is love. The love of a mother for her child. That, ladies and gentlemen, that is God. Not often do you get to go to church and expect to see God. And yet, every time she walks on stage with her daughter, that is love. That is God. Some say that God is everything, which means that you and me, and these words that I speak, and the thoughts that you're currently having, and these pictures on the wall behind me, the guitars, and yes, even the hatred and death that exists in the world is God. There are some of those that will retort and say that death and hatred is not God. That the evil that man do is not God. Sorry, but God is either everything or God is nothing. This is one of those areas where there is no gray area. Either God is or God isn't. And if God isn't, then my question to you is, Why are we here? What is the purpose to life? We are the ones that cause war and hatred and death and famine. And well, as I was saying earlier, just take a look at the current events. That's all of us. And still, I know some people may wonder, why does God allow this to happen? That's a question I still ponder. But perhaps it's maybe to teach us a lesson. I know I'm getting a little bit into dualism in this next statement, but I think in order for us to know what happiness is, we also have to know what it's not. In order to know what light is, we have to know what it's not. I don't know. So many questions and not enough answers. There are even those that say that God is consciousness. This is currently the one that I'm leaning towards more than the others. Lately, I've been reading some books, both audio and physical. And one book in particular, Deepak Chopra's You Are the Universe, talks about how the scientists are discovering that the universe is geared towards human consciousness. Right? So I think it's interesting that the place that we call the universe is geared towards our consciousness. All right. One of the other things that Deepak Chopra mentions in this book, as well as other places that I have read by other people, is that in the brain, there's only darkness. Which means, where does our perception of the light come from? So if you close your eyes for a moment, can you tell me where the smell of a rose resides in your brain? Where does the beauty of a sunset or a sunrise reside? What about Picasso, Rembrandt, Salvador Dali? What about music? Bach, Rembrandt, Beethoven? What about jazz, rock, heavy metal music? Where does that reside in the brain? Because everything that we experience is done with, or perhaps I should say, that everything that we experience, say particularly this video, is it creates when the light strikes the back of your eye. I'm not going to get into the medical terminology because I don't know it, but it creates an electrical impulse that travels along the nerve bundle. And from there, it then goes through the transfer of chemicals to form the image or the sound that we hear. I think that that's interesting, that everything that we see, we think is real. I also think it's interesting that we all experience roughly the same thing in terms of the setting sun, the rain, the wind, warm, cold, as well as a host of other things. Now, if you noticed, I didn't mention anything like happiness, fear, hatred, love, because these things are personal and we create them for ourselves, because the way one person feels love is different than somebody else. Kind of going back to what I was talking about earlier on how part of what we learned, the values, beliefs, ideals that was instilled in us help shape how we see God. It's also the same way with consciousness. So maybe, just maybe, we are consciousness experiencing itself. Again, that's a question that is open to debate. And maybe a talk for another day. If you noticed, I spoke about God is love, God is everything, God is consciousness. Even though I spoke of all three of these things separately, they're all really the same thing. All I did was simply use different words to describe the same thing. And just like a book, though it may tell a different story, the fact changes, or perhaps I should say the fact never changes, that it's still a book, regardless of what the pages say, or if you like it or dislike it. So, getting back to the question that I told you I would return to, I'm going to ask you that question again. Or maybe I should rephrase it a little bit differently. Because personally, I don't think the question should be, do you believe in God? Because to believe in something greater than yourself is actually truly the easy part. I think perhaps a better way to ask the question is, do you believe in God with that same level? Well, I'm sorry, I screwed that up. Do you believe in yourself with this same level of devotion and conviction that you believe in God? Because when we can do that as a species, all of these problems that plague us will go away, because we will see how truly unnecessary they are. So I want to say thank you for at least listening to me today. You may agree with what I say, and I'm cool with that. And you may think that what I just said is a big steaming pile of BS, and I'm cool with that, because that means that you're at least thinking for yourself. Because all I really, truly want people to do is learn to see the world with a little bit more of an open mind. Because I've noticed that we tend to see the world, and kind of primarily God, in a box. And when we keep looking in that box, we tend to forget what's outside the box. Well, interesting enough, we all have different boxes. So my box is not like your box. And your box is not like the next person's box. And sometimes we have a tendency to get upset when somebody else's box is not like ours. So sometimes you have to look outside the box to see what's truly there. And with that, I say peace be with you. Thank you.